introduce our today's speaker. Full transparency. This was my postdoc mentor, Eleanor. You cannot tell any stories about Roland today because you have more than a few to share.
Okay. No, I didn't plan any, but now you kind of like tempting me.
But Eleanor has been a tremendous resource to the Division of Geriatric Medicine and Gerontology, as well as the community of people who focus on aging-related research at the medical campus, specifically and more broadly the university. I'm just excited to have her here to talk about the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging today. I want to do a brief introduction of her. I'll turn it over to her. Dr. Eleanor Simonsick is an epidemiologist in the Longitudinal Studies Section of the Translational Gerontology Branch within the Intramural Research Program of the NI, the National Institute on Aging. And there she serves as a co-director of the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging and the Federal Project Officer of the Health, Aging, and Body Composition Study, which my dissertation, I use data from my dissertation on that stuff. For over 35 years, she's conducted aging-related research within the context of longitudinal observational studies focused on the assessment of higher-order physical function and evaluating the behavioral, psychological, biomechanical, physiological factors and conditions that impact the maintenance and decline of the overall aging process. So excited to have you here today to talk about research opportunities in the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging. Eleanor?
Sure, and thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Decided to make this more of a trip through history. So I want to give you a good deal of background about the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging, and in the process, raise the question whether or should and how, if you can, study race and aging in the BLSA, given the premise and I don't know what the objectives of RCMAR. I'm going to note right from my first slide, the National Institute on Aging is celebrating its 50th year, and that's relevant. Okay, this is not the button that's going to get me to my next slide. Oh, actually, it was delayed. So this is crazy. I'm trying to go back up to, all right, so we've already screwed up. I only wanted to go one slide, and then I went 5. Oh, wait, I got it. I think I got it here. Right. Thank you. So, found a new button. So the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging is actually over 65 years old as of this year, so longer than the National Institute on Aging. So it began in 1958, and I have great synergy with the BLSA because technically I began in 1958 as well, same year of birth. This study originally was we often talk about Nathan Schock as the founder of the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging, but actually W.W. Peter, he was a retired medical officer in the U.S. Public Health Service, and he actually provided the initial impetus for the work that led to the recruitment of normal men residing in the community, which is Baltimore, as subjects for their entire lifetime in a study of aging. So there's this, I have it up here, the book, Normal Human Aging, covers a great deal of the BLSA between 1958 and 1978, but it was actually published in 1984. And the relevance here is that there's nothing about women in this book. There is, if you look out in the index, an entry for women, and it sends you to some page, and there's really no information on that page. So there's an irony there. So over the course of the BLSA, it was initially a study of just men. And then I have noted in 1978, this is a little tongue-in-cheek of the sexual awakening. And so there's a female here, and this isn't just any female. This is Barbara Mikulski. So she is the esteemed former senator from Maryland who was newly elected to the House of Representatives from the state of Maryland in 1978. As a very diligent and curious legislator, she was interested in things that came out of NIH, the main NIH, which is in the Bethesda campus in her state of Maryland. And a landmark study had just come out that identified aspirin as being protective of heart attacks and other conditions in 10,000 people, but it was actually 10,000 men. This did not sit well with Congressman Mikulski. She was reported to have banged her fist on the table and said, "This is not okay." And then she further learned that the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging that really was taking place in her backyard, the Bayview campus where it was at the time, is essentially in Highlandtown, which is essentially in her physical backyard from where she actually grew up. So the initiative to recruit women was launched almost immediately. And it was a convenient sample because it was largely the wives of the men that were already in the study. And so one of the themes I have here is sort of sampling frame because it's relevant when we're trying to understand differences between the sexes, between the races, and whether or not it's legitimate to do that. So the next real milestone was in 1990. We are reviewed as the Intramural Program every 4 years by an outside board, and that's the Board of Scientific Counselors, and the BLSA was being reviewed, and someone noticed, or maybe someone's noticed, that we had just basically a white population from a city that is racially mixed called Baltimore. What's up with that? And so there was the impetus, not from the research community, but from well, not so much from the research team with the BLSA, but from external investigators who were overseeing, our work. Well, not my work yet. I wasn't involved yet. And so there was this effort to recruit an African-American population. So the first attempt was to contact the individuals who were involved in the Women's Health and Aging Study. Many of you at Hopkins certainly know about that study. And that was the 1/3 most disabled women living in the community. And those in the BLSA were like, oh, let's see if we can pick up on the 2/3. So maybe we can get our women from the people who don't make it into the Women's Health and Aging Study. We were not happy about that request because in the meantime, Dr. Lynn Freed had developed WAS2, which was exactly the 2/3 of the women who were not eligible to participate as the 1/3 most disabled. So they actually had to go elsewhere to find a population, both men and women. And somebody had a contact in North Carolina and in the ministries in North Carolina. So the Black population recruited to the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging in the 1990s came largely and almost exclusively from North Carolina. So very different sampling frame. And so we roll on like 10, 12 years later, and I'm calling it midlife crisis for lots of different reasons. I'm trying to be a little humorous. At this point, I'm 42 years old and I'm working in Bethesda and I'm commuting from Baltimore, and the health, aging, and body composition study, which I was involved with in a very intimate way for a long time, was sort of in its first winding down, and I needed to do something different. So I became part of the Intramural Research Program in the National Institute on Aging and was given an opportunity to work on this legacy study called the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging, or the BLSA. And I started to put together my first data set. And I think I'm going to get this right. And so this is where the silos come in. Much of the BLSA was not coordinated across different disciplines. So at this this period of time, the people who did cognition and the people who did cardiovascular function, the people who actually did surveys about behavior, the people who did personality, they used the same population, but they didn't necessarily ascertain these different dimensions of aging and function at the same time. And so if you want to put together a data set where everybody has every measure serially over time in the BLSA before 2002, you might start out with 600, 650 people who have cardiovascular fitness measured. And then you add another variable like cognition and you get down to 300 people, and you add another variable like exercise behavior and you get down to 150 people. And if you want to follow them over time, you suddenly are like thinking, what did I do? I left this other environment where the data was planned to be done serially in a very large population. And here I am stuck with maybe not quite the tools for the things that I'm trying to do. So then my disparaging thing was, this is just silos and this is just going to be a challenge. But in retrospect, it is appropriate to think of the BLSA because of when it started in 1958 and nobody was looking at aging, that so many things had to be developed from scratch. And so the BLSA actually still serves as the landmark study that helped us understand how you even measure cardiorespiratory health and fitness in adults and in aging individuals. It is a landmark study for the work it did at brain aging. It's the first study that actually had repeat, use MRI technology to look at the brain and to do repeat brain imaging, thanks just using Resnick. The neo-personality, the world standard of personality assessment was developed within the BLSA and still remains in that distinction. And then we have Ruben Andrews, whose seminal work in understanding glucose tolerance and diabetes came out of the BLSA. And then there was tremendous work by Jeff Metter and a few other people that began to look at all different dimensions of muscle strength and nerve function. So without these pillars, we would not have, or maybe by now we would have, but certainly that was an important distinction. So back to midlife crisis. So many other studies by the year 2000, certainly Health ABC within the Intramural program is one of them. But there's the cardiovascular health study, there's the Framingham study, there was multiple, the Honolulu aging study, there was multiple studies of aging now that looked at the same people over time in many different ways. So the BLSA was falling out of favor and effectively had a midlife crisis. I show Luigi here because Dr. Luigi Ferrucci is the current director of the BLSA, and he became the director through a concerted search to find someone who could resurrect and to reestablish the BLSA as a premier study of aging. We were also given the opportunity to move where we did the data collection from the Bayview campus to what is the 5th floor of Harbor Hospital, just a tunnel ride away from the Bayview campus. And we have a really state-of-the-art clinical research facility in which we conduct the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging. It's where our participants spend time with us during their visits here. And we do multiple other studies in the clinical research unit in the intramural program, but this was a new beginning. So this was a successful resolution, we'll say, of a midlife crisis. So in the intervening next few years, we pulled together a new paradigm of measurement where everybody's getting every test every time, and with detailed survey questionnaires about current history, and past. And once that all got together, there's a realization that many of our participants were old, and many of them were not doing so well. And we wanted to revitalize the sample to be closer to its original intent, was to study high-functioning individuals as they aged. And so that became the Healthy or Ideal Aging Study, and we had a very targeted recruitment at that point. And then now the BLSA has moved on to include a high focus on biological mechanisms, because we have a phenomenal sample storage facility. We've really embraced the whole omics era, and we have bank specimens over many, many decades for several people. Okay, so what is it that we actually have in the BLSA? So this is a little slightly out of date, but the numbers are pretty spot on. So we have over 1,400 women with over 8,000 visits, and over 2,000 men with 16,000 visits, with a mean follow-up of somewhere, 24 to 30 years. The current census is 1,100 participants. Half of them are women, so we came up to speed there. And actually 25% of the population is Black. The visit schedule is based on age, with those under 60 seen every 4 years. Those in the next 60 to 79 are seen every 2 years, and those 80 years and older we see annually. And for individuals who are starting to decline, we actually have a home visit program. And their visit length is 2 to 4 resident days. And I'm going to walk you through everything that we do while they're here in the optimal order in which we try and get these. But you can see that the sample with age at last visit is very much on the old side, where you look at the brown and the green, or the lighter green. Almost over half of our population is 70 to 90 years old. We have a sliver of individuals who are 90 to 99, and half of those are actually seen in home visits. So that's a very important component of the study, to be able to continue to follow our oldest old. And we have a tiny sliver of individuals, 107. And I just learned this morning we are doing a home visit on one of our participants who is 107. So that's really exciting to learn. But we're in the process of doing new recruitment in a small way, because the clinic is probably pretty full, and most weeks. And we're really targeting, the recruitment of individuals, under 50 and ideally under 40, to replenish the younger population. Okay, so what happens when people get here? So I'm going to show you both the sort of the schedule, and I think this also gives you a flavor for the breadth and depth of the kind of measures that we have available. So most people show up sort of late on day one. Many of them, even though it's Baltimore study, many of them live, within or outside of 2 hours from here. Some people originally were in the area and have since moved somewhere else, maybe Florida, maybe California, but they're still highly committed to the study, and they come. And they come every year for our oldest old. So there's a consent. We take vitals. We capture their weight and height. Sometimes we send people home at this particular time. Some people think of BLSA as as where they get their health care. So we get people who come in who maybe have a blood pressure issue or something like that. And so we're very conscientious about taking care of our participants and helping them take better care of themselves. So while it's not an intervention study, there is an intervention kind of quality to a study that captures all of this detailed information about someone's health status. We give them dinner, and then we do, for a subset, we do a GI, gastrointestinal permeability test for a subset of individuals, because as you get older, there's something called leaky gut, and we're trying to understand what that's all about. And we begin the collection of 24-hour. Early on the second day, 6:30 in the morning, if not earlier, there's a blood draw. We feed them. And then there's a detailed history and physical, and this is done by a nurse practitioner. So there's some standardized questions, but there's a lot of actually hands-on physical measurements that are done by the nurse practitioner, much like what would be a normal physical exam in your doctor's office, but like sort of geared up and much more specific, because your doctor isn't going to spend an hour and 15 minutes doing a history and physical. We do that here. The activity monitor is sometimes given at this part of the visit, so we measure, like every study does now, physical activity and sleep activity using activity monitor. And we include it in the testing that we do so we can calibrate it to actual measurements that we're doing elsewhere. Sensory issues are huge. So we do pretty comprehensive vision. We do taste testing and we do smell testing. The cognition here is listed to be about an hour and a half. It probably lasts more than that. So we do cognitive testing that's really thorough. And I'm going to give you a little flavor of that later on, where we're actually looking for first signs of dementia, but we're also looking for really early markers of maybe loss of executive function or the normal decline in aging that does not even approach what we would ever call dementia or cognitive, true impairment. So we're really understanding the aging process and cognition throughout. They get lunch. We have a gait lab with gait mat, which is a new addition. We have a camera system. This is where we can capture all forms of movement and people attempting to walk and people attempting to stand on one foot. Our participants doing Foursquare tests. So we have a lot of challenge tests in the gait lab. We also do some dual task measurements in the gait lab to try and understand how trying to do a cognitive test affects one's gait. We do some of the standard tests. Most people are familiar with the short physical performance battery. Of course, we do it here. We do the expanded version because we have a much healthier population. And we do the 400-meter walker long distance corridor test. In this particular version in the BLSA, we're also collecting oxygen consumption because we have a portable device. So we can compute things like the energetic cost of walking, and we can compute other related factors like their energy reserve. We do EMG, which is basically nerve function test, and we also do nerve conduction. We do DEXA, so that is where we get bone density, and we also can look at compartmentalized lean effect. We do a whole host of strength measurements, and then we do the personality testing that I mentioned in the beginning, the 240 item. This is done in a bank of computers where the participants are doing this, privately, in effect. And there's a whole other set of questions that we also do where we feel like it is better for the individual to self-administer these items so that they might be more inclined to answer sort of maybe more honestly if they're feeling like this is in private. So there's general well-being questions. There's sort of more, depression, anxiety sort of questions and the like. Then they get dinner, they get another blood draw. We recommend that people, we require that people do not donate blood before they come here because basically sum total blood draw is about a pint of blood like you would give at, we bank a lot of that blood. We collect more urine. We do a full oral glucose tolerance test, and while we have a captive audience, we again ask more questions. So we have a whole series of surveys that are on tablets, so our participants can self-administer a sleep survey, a cannabis use survey, a pet ownership history, a whole lot of different types of surveys. The Pittsburgh Fatigability Scale, I believe, is in there. And this is a mechanism that helps us sort of kind of sneak in a few new and maybe even experimental things as they're under development during this time when it's kind of downtime for them. Give them breakfast. We do very sophisticated hearing testing, and this is in collaboration with Frank Lynn's group at Hopkins. We do echocardiography, and we do it at a point in the exam that precedes some of the max cardiovascular testing as a safety concern. We do this test called fatigability, where we put people in a treadmill at a very slow speed of 1.5 miles per hour or 0.67 meters per second. This is one of my tests, so I'm going to spend a little time on it. Which is the 0.67 meters per second is sort of the frailty cutoff speed. And we've now expanded this test. So initially it's 5 minutes at this rate. We now ramp them up over the next few minutes afterwards to their normal gait that we already have measured. And then we have them continue that for a total of 10 minutes. And we ask again how much effortful that was, because we were finding with our with the 0.67 meters per second, most of the participants were reporting a low level of effort. A few people were reporting a high level. So we felt like we wanted to raise the ceiling of the test. And so we bring people up to their normal rate. And we do see that individuals are hitting what would be considered their maximum output or maximum effort, even after 15 minutes of walking at what would be their normal pace. If people get through this test, then then it becomes a VO2 max test. And once we finish that test and they meet maximum capacity, then we ask them to do a lung function test. There are a lot of other cardiovascular parameters. We look at pulse wave velocity, so that's measure of arterial stiffness, and we look at the ankle brachial index. Then they get lunch. And then we send them downstairs to the MRI suite. So we own the MRI suite within Harbor Hospital. And we've just, we've had the 3T MRI for a very long time. And we've just added the 7T to our repertoire. And we're beginning early testing on how we're actually going to use that and compare across different mechanisms and to see what we can get at from this higher intensity MRI. It's probably one of the least favorite parts of the exam, because we ask a lot of our participants to spend this many hours. So then we give them dinner. On the last day, this is a typical but not always the schedule we have. We do computer tomography, and this is in under contract with the hospital here at Harbor Hospital. And then we do some even more visual testing, and we do some proprioception to get the full level of sort of the stool function for balance. And then this is probably our best retention strategy is the results review. So individuals have a good bit of time. It could be an hour, it could be longer, with the nurse practitioner and other examiners on the unit as needed to really go through the details of the results. The one thing that we do not actually share with them is their cognitive testing. We might share with their family in concerns if there has been a large change or individuals are showing signs of dementia. So that's a lot. And so basically all these things sort of come together to produce, and this is the paradigm that Luigi Ferrucci has been using to illustrate what we're trying to do in the BLSA. So we are all in the omics with these biological mechanisms of resilience. And so we collect all of these for the most part. And if we don't have the available technology, we're retaining samples so that when that technology happens, we're ready to actually use it. But the area in which most of us work is the aging phenotype. So we have very many and very excellent measures in looking at body composition and tissue composition from both DEXA and then CT. One of my areas is energy production and demand, and we get that from our VO2 assessments during all different levels of demand. Homeostatic regulation, we're looking at glucose, we're looking at inflammation, we're looking at thyroid function, for example. And then the laboratory behavioral neurology really handles all the neurodegenerative studies and the loss of neuroplasticity and the work that they do with the MRI and the cognitive testing. And then we have all coverage of the geriatric syndromes, many of it through questionnaire data and the physical exam. Okay. I do want to show that it isn't all negative, that many of our measures were expressly developed not to just capture decline in debility, but to capture capacity. So we can look at locomotor capacity and cognitive capacity and sensory capacity. It's not just the absence of ability. It is really trying to understand the full range and not just decline. And so the secondary question I asked in my title slide, because of, the group that I'm talking to, is really, can you study race and aging in the BLSA? And I think, and so what I wanted to look at is how many Black and white, Black men and women do we have, and when did they come into the study? So this slide, and actually the next slide is probably a little bit better, where we see that there were a handful of people in the 60s, a handful of men, I should say, who were a race other than white, who were a Black race. Another smaller handful in the 70s, and then virtually no one in the 80s. But after the Board of Scientific Counselors was concerned about the whiteness of the population, and we went and worked with people from North Carolina, we added almost 100 Black men and 150 Black women. And then in the year, and this continued through the year 2002, 2003. And that's when it was the midlife crisis. There was a change of personnel. There wasn't any recruitment done for a while. And then when Luigi and I came on board, we started new recruitment for the IDEAL study to replenish individuals who were at least 60 years of age older, who were high functioning. And we were able to recruit just under 20 men and right around 20 women. So not a lot. No, these individuals came from the greater Baltimore area and not from North Carolina. Okay. So one of the things, and I think this was kind of Roland's ask. So we have numbers of Black individuals, and I wanted to, but they're very small. And I knew that we had done some work, and Roland is part of this. So Nancy Charles Schaefer was a postdoc with us. I believe she was here before the pandemic, so 2018 to 2020 perhaps. And we continued to see, in many of our analyses, we will control for race, even though we're not targeting race. And I kept noticing that it was one of the most strongest and persistent significant variable in looking at function when I wasn't even looking for it. It was just, it's a control measure, and I didn't really want to and didn't feel like it was appropriate for me to pursue this. But I shared this information with Nancy, and we wanted to look at it because most studies have very disparate socioeconomic characteristics when they're looking at Blacks and whites. Roland has done a lot of this work in the Women's Health and Aging Study and in Health ABC. And so we had an opportunity here to look at people who were from relatively more similar socioeconomic backgrounds and to try and understand if these apparent differences were still expressed or still observable. And in fact, so the important things to consider are, one, in the modern era, where we're measuring sort of everything all at once all the time, we have 97 Black men, and these are individuals aged 60 and older. So if we go a little younger, the numbers are a little larger, but for the most part, the population is small, and we have 164 women. And here are all the distributions. So the education distribution is very different than in most studies, where most people, we have over 65, 70% of both Black men and women who are college graduates, for example. And so when we look at further data from Nancy's study, the comparison between usual gait speed is that white men are substantially faster than Black men on usual gait speed over 6 meters. And we see that difference also actually more distinctly between white women and Black women. On the right, we're looking at an endurance test, and we see basically the same story. So this is how fast you can walk 400 meters. So lower number is better. So we're looking at 295 seconds for white men versus 321 seconds for Black men, and 301 seconds for white women, and 321 for Black women, for example. And so Nancy delved into this further by looking at body composition, controlling for the little bit of differences we saw in education and in income, but also trying to understand, are there meaningful differences in body composition that explain the differences in function? And effectively, this is for men, and we're seeing that there's a slight dissipation of observed differences when we take into account, strength and quadriceps, mass and fat percentage and a whole other things. But there's still some residual differences in men, and we also have residual differences. But this is just to give you a flavor of, a little bit of the challenges that we face when we're trying to do race-related differences, because we're looking at individuals who came largely from different backgrounds into a study, and we can't ever really completely account for them. What I wanted to share with you, and I think this is a question that Roland sort of asked offline of me. One of the things that we have in the BLSA is really this extensive neuroimaging history, and we have an extensive, which is portrayed here. And so while the population of Black individuals is, as I just showed you, in their 60s is, a little close to 100 men and about 160 women, we do have data that isn't available in most studies, especially with neuroimaging, PET scans. Oh, I lost I can see my slide there, and maybe I'll go this way. Oh, there it is. Okay, and then all the cognitive testing that we do. So again, we do testing where we're looking for decline, but we also do testing to examine resilience and executive function over time. And this is like the eras of which things were done. So most of the cognition started in 1990 in earnest, and the same with neuroimaging. And so that data is available, and we openly share. And so again, can you study aging in Black Americans in the BLSA? Absolutely. And we can offer data that isn't available in many other studies. For more information, we do have a website. It's where the website can also tell you about, has information on actually how to apply to get to use data in the BLSA. We have a full open and sharing policy, and any other questions can be directed directly to me. And I guess this is a good time to open things up for questions. I was told to speak for 30 minutes. I think I got that part right.
Eleanor, thanks so much. I didn't know they had pet questions in BLSA. I caught that.
Wait,
Yeah.
so actually that was a collaboration. So this is actually an opportunity. So
Yeah.
well, we openly, because sort of we have to, but it's a good thing to share data. People can apply to use our population to add new measures. So this is a collaboration. And I'm going to totally blank on our name because you're asking me. A colleague at the University of Maryland School of Medicine.
Oh,
And so we have it's extremely detailed PET questionnaire, and that is done while people are in the doing the OGTT. So it's a lower burden, and pet ownership matters.
I think I know.
We'll go with that.
Yeah. I did for
And it
everybody
doesn't
on the
have to,
call.
and it doesn't have to do with walking your dog either.
Exactly.
Yeah, it really has to do with some level of companionship.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a little bit of, you have to have a certain level of function and capacity to continue owning a pet, right? But we're still seeing in both cognition and physical function that there is some a little bump for people who have their pets. And mostly dogs and cats. I have a turtle, so I don't think that really, that really counts. We don't have enough turtles in our study population to be able to really ask that as a question.
Great. Let's see, there's a question.
Yeah, maybe.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. Amazing talk. I think we might come across. I was a postdoc at an NIA. I finished in 2016, and now I'm an assistant professor here at Howard University. And I actually was very interested in the BLSA study, especially from perspective of us recruiting minority participants to our study. I'm interested in the recruitment of especially Black participants from Washington, D.C. area. We have now 150 participants recruited for our aging study. But my question is, it's very difficult to, I'm interested also in following up on the on the participants. What would be your advice, or how can we combine the efforts? You said that you also need more Black participants in your study. I need more participants in general. How is it possible to kind of strengthen our basic researchers? How can we, or translational researchers, how can we entertain those participants to keep them for longitudinal study? Or what are the possible collaboration with you for example, adding more tests? I'm interested more in olfaction, especially in preventing neurodegeneration or assessing neurodegeneration. Is there anything that I can use, like my technique, and take a swab from your participants' noses, or how would that work?
So,
thank you.
Okay, you asked lots of questions all at once. So let me see what I can do. So probably the best recruitment tool that we've ever used is one that, I don't think we ever activated, but our participants did. So word of mouth. We get people calling us to see if they can participate. That is rare in any study, but it is the best examination you could ever get, and it's for free. We don't pay our participants. I almost feel like some of what you would be useful to you might be better served by talking to someone who is involved in the Handle study. And do you know the Handle study?
Yeah, I know of. I'm not part of it or anything. Yeah.
Right. So that is also within the National Institute on Aging Intramural Research Program. And probably I can connect you with the people who run that study. I mean, Roland, do you want to do that, or I can contact Michelle Evans?
Yeah, I know Dr. Evans
Okay.
from my postdoc time, but if it's possible, I will write you an email afterwards
Sure.
if that's okay. Yeah, I was always very interested, how can I connect, because for us, I think it's always difficult to keep the participants active and keep them, entertain them somehow, because the for people who are coming back for 1 year follow-up or 2 years follow-up, it's always very
The retention is a challenge. It's not my area of expertise by any means. And I think that the Handle study has probably had to work through retention issues in a much bigger way than the BLSA has. So I think that would be the expertise is we haven't had to develop that expertise. Just because of the nature of, I think, who was interested in joining the study in the beginning, and that almost served as retention as the information people get back. We've had a little loss of individuals from North Carolina. For many years, we supported or underwrote transportation costs, and that we've kind of changed over time in terms of that. And so we've probably lost some people there, but we continue to do home visits, and we will travel to them to do home visits. And I know that Handles has done home visits as well, so it's not just the big van parked wherever it gets parked periodically or the rotation. But I know that they actually go into the homes too, given that the population has aged a lot and is often pretty debilitated.
Okay, thank
Emmanuel,
you.
Emmanuel, you have a question?
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for this opportunity here and for such a great talk. I don't know much about the BLSA, so this is the first time that I'm actually learning so much about it. But my question relates to I'm a health economist, and I'm always interested in any question that has to do with like the economics of aging. So I'm wondering what kind of like economic variables, if at all, the BLSA strives to collect, or if there are opportunities to collect such types of variables, so that we can try to understand also the relationship between some of these mental health and behavioral and metabolic factors and economic factors.
So we do a terrible job of collecting economic variables. We have total income cut points that should be updated, with our highest cut point of $50,000. That's why that was the number that was used in Nancy's study. We've just recently begun to collect more early life experience data. So it begins with an M. The acronym begins with an M. It's a study that Teresa Seaman is heavily involved with, and Midas, thank you.
Yeah.
And so we've adopted several components of the Midas kind of socioeconomic background and early life experience questionnaire. So that is part of the BLSA, and I believe it's part of the tablet version where people are able to answer those questions sort of more in private. And they're not being asked by an individual. And so that's where we are. We've done a little bit of trying to understand neighborhood characteristics. We've collected a little bit of that data as well. But again, we're such a small and select population that we're good to add on to some other study when we're looking at these issues, and not to be the sole source of that information. I think we help expand the distribution to the more highly educated and more affluent populations, both white and African American. But I think alone we don't do an adequate job to be able to understand those different factors.
Great, thank you.
Is George on still?
I don't see George.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
So you have a question in there. Can you ask the question?
Oh, yeah, I popped it in the chat window, Eleanor. Great talk. Really learned a lot of new things about BLSA today. I was wondering, you had mentioned that BLSA is not an intervention program, even though some participants seem to informally sort of treated healthcare. But I was wondering, in terms of other intervention programs they may have been or are currently involved in, like a cognitive training program or physical exercise program or whatever, how closely are you monitoring sort of what else they're doing to, maintain their vitality and slow decline as they get older?
it's remarkable. So we review all the participants we've seen in the week every Friday morning. So it's a Friday morning. So we've just reviewed, and then we also review who's coming in the next week. And you would think that a study that's so intense as the BLSA would have a population that they themselves would be intense about their health. And it's not, it's remarkable. We do have those people who are really intense about their health. But we have as many, if not more, who are morbidly obese, and they don't exercise, and they don't eat very well, and they don't take care of themselves. We do a full dietary assessment. And so it's sort of like, we're telling you every time you come that your blood sugar is a mess, your cholesterol's a mess, your downstream functional aspects are kind of a mess. And you keep coming back every 2 years, every year, you know, when they get 80 years and older, and people make it to 80 years and older, and they're still like not the picture of health. I'm perplexed, actually. But it is better for research that we have more varied distribution in people's health habits.
When they come in, do they complain of having memory problems, or do they exhibit any type of cognitive, decline?
Oh, many do. There's a group of advanced age. So part of, it's an interesting and important challenge. So people get a packet, let's say 3 months, but we book them for their next visit before they leave. Right. And then people get a packet maybe 6 months before their visit, probably closer to 3. And then we follow up with them a few weeks later to make sure they got it. And then we follow up with them closer to their visit to ask if they've had new health conditions, to ask them what their transportation is. Sometimes we provide it, sometimes we're connected to it, like we'll pick them up at the airport or something like that. And have they had new health issues that might delay their visit? And that's where for some of our older participants that we've got to know over the years, where some of their cognitive issues will start to emerge. They're not remembering some of the diagnoses that they have reported to us year after year, or visit after visit after visit. So we are seeing people through the whole dementia process, frankly, where they're showing some executive control issues, and then some minor memory issues, the MCI level memory issues. And then where people are, being challenged both cognitively and then functionally, physically, and how those all interact. If
So I guess
that makes sense. So we do not and really cannot bring people with a full-blown dementia diagnosis on the unit unless they're with their significant other. And we've included and made allowances for that now and again, especially if there's one robust spouse who wants to still come, but their partner is a bit challenged. We'll have both of them on the unit and make sure that everybody's taken care of in the way that they need to be.
Thank you. I guess the silver lining is the exercise component. I didn't realize this, and I used to be a postdoc, but I read a lot about ADRD, and I go to the YMCA, and it depends on when you go. So I went one day, and I was interacting with these seniors, and they were so encouraging, and they were just telling me, to keep coming back, because I came to the YMCA. I go every day. And I thought, wow, who needs this? And they were telling me, they said, everybody needs exercise. And it's just something that I think we all know it, but it's like people who've had a stroke. I think they look back and they say, what could I have done to have avoided this? So I wish there could be like an exercise component, or maybe they can build more exercise centers. Dr. Reebok, do they have exercise centers with the program that focuses on I know in Baltimore there's the experience core, and the the older parents work with the younger kids. Do they have exercise gyms, or is the experience core connected to the YMCA?
No, it's not, Gail. It's not a formal exercise program. The physical activity really derives from the the volunteerism in the schools and going up and down the aisles of the school and getting in and out of the small chairs and things like that. I mean, we monitor their physical activity, but there's not a physical exercise component per se.
Wow.
Oh, Eleanor, I have I just started monitoring the chat. There's two people asked similar questions, and the question is, are there plans to capture details on racism, sexism, ageism, and BLSA, and then and also lifetime exposure to social determinants of health?
Yes, actually, so the questionnaires that we've recently adopted and adapted, and it was Nancy Childs Schaefer who kind of got us to do this, to push the powers that be, let's say, to do this, and Zenobia carried through with this work. And so we are using what's in the MIDAS study.
Yeah.
And we've adapted some of the other environmental exposures from, so the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, of course, would have some detailed questionnaires and instruments about, exposures to toxins, because that they travel together sometimes with poverty, as we know. And so we're also capturing that now. It'll take a while, right? We see, I didn't mention this, we see probably 8 people a week. So it's gonna take a while before we have a sufficiently large number of individuals to have a sample that we can do some analyses with. But we're there. We're there actually. It's just gonna be a while before you're gonna see any publications.
Great. Well, we're right at time, Eleanor. Thank you so much for this presentation. And I'm hopeful that people found value in this and